Welcome to the Michigan Realty Business Podcast, where we discuss everyday business concepts with Michigan's local entrepreneurs and business owners. Today's episode is brought to you by Venture X, a co-working space in the financial district of downtown Detroit. It's a perfect space for small to medium-sized businesses to access office space without the overhead and the headache, while also being plugged in to the energy of one of the most exciting urban areas in the entire country. My name is Jeff Rutledge, and I'm a licensed realtor at Good Company Realty in downtown Royal Oak, Michigan, and I'm the founder of MichiganRealty.org. Today, my guest is Taj Yale. Now, Taj understands marketing probably more than most people that I've talked to in a very long time. And so today, we dive into some of the more surface layers of the marketing world to help you have a better understanding of how to grow your business. Now, before we begin, I would like to emphasize that this conversation is separate from my practice as a licensed realtor here in the state of Michigan. It is, however, part of my desire to uplift Michigan and people, which includes business owners, that make up our community and the places that we call home. So, without any more delay, please let me introduce Taj Yale.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taj Yale. I'm the founder and CEO of Think Impact. We are a social media marketing agency in Rochester Hills, Michigan. And we specialize in social media content creation, social media ads, graphic design, website development. In addition to Think Impact being the parent marketing company, we also have an NGO division called Think Helping, where we help nonprofits serve their mission through the marketing work that we offer at cost-effective rates. I did my bachelor's and master's in marketing at Oakland University, and I'm always looking to grow my business and form new relationships as a result.
I love it. Well, Taj, so when you list out all of those specialties that you could focus on in the world of marketing, it all seems to be hyper digitized in the sense that every one of those verticals you can do online. Is that your primary focus? Is everything digital?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I think obviously a key component of marketing is branding. And through the services that we offer, we think that it's important to kind of tell a story where people can relate to in a digital world. I think gone are the days of traditional advertising like billboards and flyers, and now everything is being digitized on social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, now TikTok. So yeah, I mean, we think each component can be digitized in a way that makes it easy for the end consumer to understand what the story is that we're trying to depict, whether it be about our business or one of our clients and their success stories, local community.
And obviously, as a marketer, you get thrown into various situations where you kind of have to be forced to think on your feet. Each business that you may represent thinks about their customer and who they are a little bit differently, right? And so now you're the guy that businesses hire as whether it's a consultant role or all of these various services that need to be filled in. Maybe there's gaps missing in a business and they need a new website, or they need to better track their data. You have the ability to then take their needs and simplify a product or a solution for them. Is that about right?
Yeah, correct. And then we also work with them to contextualize it in a way where it's not too long of a story, or it basically makes it easy for the end client to understand how their story is going to be portrayed through using these platforms, and also using analytics to kind of see how the messaging is through these platforms and who's viewing it. So it provides a more deeper understanding of how the content that we put out, how it's being received, and how we can kind of strategically make changes if need be.
Now, that right there, your answer was, you dropped, I would say, about 4 times now already in this conversation, the word story. So what does story mean to you?
Story means the background of the branding, how the company formed, what the story behind the name of a company is, and how it's branded in a way that can be understandable and relatable. Along with, obviously most companies will talk about their services that they offer and all of that, but it's kind of the backstory of how the company formed. Maybe, typically we also ask our clients why they came up with the name of their business that they did. And so you kind of provide a clear picture of, okay, this was the inception, this was the idea, this is why we call it our business what it is. And then that kind of leads into their services that can benefit others in the community as well.
So it's in many ways a backbone as to their identity, as to how you can branch off and tell that theme in many different mediums. Is that
we try to customize each content towards each platform. What I like to always say is if you have the same content for a TV ad, you probably aren't going to get many views. So, to contextualize it in social media terms, like Instagram is much more visual. So if you post more appealing images, you're more likely to get more hits. Whereas Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, you have the ability to kind of describe the story or describe the main idea of a business and what they offer. And so I think a key portion of it is customizing each piece of content to each platform, rather than just having the same message across all platforms.
To boil that down a little bit, what I think you're saying is that when you're on YouTube and you're creating a 5-minute or a 10-minute video, that's certainly not going to work on TikTok. Right. And it's a completely different span of attention that is required and a certain level of investment that is required that varies depending on whatever platform they're on. And so psychologically speaking, you're saying to diversify the method as to how you create and tell that story so it can fit the various social media platform verticals that are out there to plug into. And I think that's a very smart way to go about it. And do you see, because like whenever I think of like all of the various platforms, like there's always another one coming out, right? The most recent hype, I should say, because that's the best word to use, is in augmented reality or in virtual reality or like the metaverse, right? And so in your opinion, does that have a space in the future of marketing, or is that just still a new technology that needs to be refined in order to find where the value is? Where are we right now in that space?
Yeah, I think it's still a new technology that needs to be refined. I understand that a lot of these platforms are going towards that trend, but in my personal opinion, I think it's technology that there's not much research as yet, but it should be more refined and kind of explain how people that use the platform can benefit within that meta world reality. Because to your point, I do agree most things are going in that space, but I think we need more research to kind of see strategically how different companies may use that to their advantage.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty skeptical about the entire metaverse thing, but I think that it does have at least the raw ingredients to be a platform where you could find another new layer of advertising and marketing where you're connecting with an audience. How that looks, I have no idea. and nobody really does. So.
No, to your point, I think Meta, aka I guess Facebook,
right,
with their Oculus technology, I think they've kind of made inroads within that virtual reality, using those goggles and trying to maneuver. I think they made an early push into that space, but to your point, and at least from what I've seen, I don't think there's a well-defined approach on how they can integrate that within their platforms.
Yeah, well, from a real estate context, a lot of people in real estate are talking about how you can have virtual land. Well, the problem with that is that virtual land, when you create these NFT worlds, well, there's a certain fungibility of actual land in the real world versus something that, you know, is non-fungible and doesn't exist, and you can just keep creating new ones and new ones and new ones. You know, the non-fungibility of reality is that there's only so much land that you can create. And so it's just weird that people are trying to compare the value of real land with the value of some made up thing that could be recreated over and over and over again in an infinite universe. It it doesn't take on that same value of some finite land here on Earth.
Right.
And you
Reality.
can't actually live in it. You don't have the primal needs being, you know, provided to people using it. There's no real shelter there. There's no real food there. You still have to come back to reality for all of that. So to what degree will it get adopted is going to be a huge marketing challenge that I'm excited to see, both from a real estate context, but also just the general industry. So I was just very curious what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, looking at, to your point about NFTs, I mean, it's interesting how it kind of becomes a reality check where this NFT form, you can kind of create your own painting and sell it and monetize off of it. I mean, I'm sure in real estate, at least from the limited knowledge that I know, like you can also do virtual tours of not actually having to go to the property, but you can kind of view it through the website. And I'm sure that will probably evolve into the metaverse at some point.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah, like God, that would be actually very scary now that I'm thinking about it. You know, we're talking about putting on goggles, being able to go into an exact recreation of a real neighborhood and walk through every single house and see the layout of every single house that has ever had a 3D Matterport walkthrough in the world of real estate. That's, I don't want to speak too soon, but that might be a little bit intrusive. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it should be interesting. You know, especially with all of these different wearables kind of integrating that technology, and a lot of companies kind of making that the next big focus, if you will, on these platforms, coupled with Web3 as well. It should be interesting to see how it pans out.
So what is your favorite industry to market? I mean, there's so many of them. What do you typically like to focus on?
I like the entertainment, autonomous, and 3D printing kind of space, because the reason is because those are up and coming emerging technologies that I do think will define how the environment operates eventually. I mean, autonomous cars, we work with autonomous robots, but autonomous cars are not too far away.
Yeah.
A lot of companies are utilizing 3D printing. And so those are kind of the three aspects that I like, just because some of them I'm personally interested in, and it's also nice to learn the business behind how each industry and each sector kind of markets and tells what they're selling in each space. So like, you know, marketing 3D printing will be obviously different from, you know, music labels. We've worked with music labels. So it's kind of interesting to see the unconventional ways that marketing can be done through different sectors.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So you have autonomous vehicles that you like to focus on, or anything really autonomous related. And then 3D printing. What was the first one again?
Sports. Or sorry,
Yeah, like
I should say music rather.
That's right.
Music, because we've done work with some music labels. So it's just interesting to see the style in which people within those industries, it's all different in terms of the way they market themselves and try to stand out from their competition, while also learning the business aspect of it too.
Well, when I think of music, I think of you know, more of a personal brand rather than a corporate brand or a business brand, right? And that poses different challenges when you go into the world of marketing. And so what's for you, how do you like to distinguish the difference between a personal brand and a business brand?
I mean, personal branding, I think it has a lot to do with content. So trying to build a community and trying to brand yourself around the kind of content that you post. Not so much so about kind of your accolades or the awards or things like that, but user-generated content that can be helpful to other people that may operate in the same sector or industry. Whereas corporate marketing, it has more of a corporate twist to it, if that makes sense, in terms of it can't be personalized, but there are certain checkboxes that have to remain consistent within the messaging. Whereas personal, you have the creativity to formulate your own content.
There's more room to make errors.
Well, errors, and kind of see from a personal branding standpoint, it's trial and error is what I like to say in terms of the messaging and how you describe certain aspects of your business or what you do, and kind of seeing what kind of messaging style resonates with the type of target audience that you're trying to attract at the end of the day. Whereas corporate, there are guidelines in place saying you have to mention certain things, and if you deviate away, then it may not be an appropriate approach if it doesn't follow those guidelines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a little bit more strict and
more structured.
100%. That's a great way to say it. More structured. Yeah, I see that. And that's part of the reason why we're doing these podcasts, right? Like Taj, being able to just have a casual conversation back and forth. You and I really get to then just display to the world who we are on more of a personal level while touching on things that are business related. But it allows us to have moments in a conversation that maybe we go off in left field, maybe we're, but like that's who we are. Mm-hmm. And so I think that there's something very powerful about a personal brand that and I may be just making a generalized assumption, but it makes sense for every small to medium-sized business, for the leaders of that company or that business to have a personal brand on top of whatever that business may be. And all of that is essentially two pillars of content, two pillars of story, mm-hmm. as you said, tailored to a particular end user or interested party. So I think that's an underrated skill set by entrepreneurs, small business owners, medium-sized, business leaders, even that ability to really show a more authentic self and be that personal brand that is necessary in order to truly lead a company into a digital age. So that's really interesting you say that. All right, so let's talk about autonomous vehicles. What has really, in your opinion, what has really moved that industry from a marketing standpoint? Where was it along the line? Was it when Tesla finally was able to start mass producing these vehicles that could just drive autonomously? Or where was that, in your opinion, where that marketing switch got turned on?
Yeah, I mean, I think before the technology was there, but I don't think it was marketed in a way where a lot of people got to know the ins and outs of technology. And I think now it's kind of with the beneficial features that it offers people, whether it's commuting day to day or autonomous, it also reduces kind of where EV is going now. So I think it's becoming a more globalized approach. I mean, if you talk about, Singapore, for example, our client, they have driverless buses. And so, in Netherlands, they have driverless people movers. So I think the emerging trends are there. It just wasn't marketed in a way where there was only a small group of people that actually knew what the technology is and how it could be beneficial at the end of the day. But with companies like Tesla and Uber trying to test out the autonomous taxis that are coming soon. So the bigger companies, once they started investing their technologies in that space, then it became much more knowledgeable for people who may not operate in that sector.
Well, don't you think that some of the marketing challenges for what do you call that? I'm drawing a blank here. Automated vehicles. Don't you think that some of the hesitation is that there's a certain level of risk. When you get into that car, you're not in control anymore. And so how do you overcome from a marketing level that human challenge?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent that I understand it, it's all mapped technology. So typically they use different mapping navigation points. And so through that, that's kind of how it can be overcome, I think. And a lot of it has to do with the marketing in terms of how it can be avoided through different features within the autonomous car itself, where it can sense that there are obstacles and, along those lines, into the technicalities of it, which I'm not that well versed in, so I won't even try to describe. But in terms of the technology that's made, that programs the car itself, I think that's typically how at least we market it, and how it can kind of overcome those barriers where people may not either be familiar with the technology or think of those barriers as well.
I mean, I can imagine that due to just it being a new technology and people so used to being in control on the steering wheel, that challenge, no matter how good the technology becomes, the marketing that's going to be required in order to bridge that gap is going to be, I mean, billions of dollars. Because I just don't know if I have faith in the citizenry out there who drive, that they're going to feel a sense of trust when they get into some sort of automated vehicle. You know what I mean? Right? Like, so what other challenges do you think the automated industry faces beyond just something like that?
I mean, I think it's part of it is consumer education and trying to explain how their mapping technology can overcome those barriers, and how they've kind of tested it, made sure that it's okay, and then have that knowledge base be trusted by the consumer, and let them try it out for themselves too, to kind of get a sense of how it actually feels versus the marketing portion of it.
It sort of sounds like what you're saying is that most of the marketing that's going to be required is going to have to play off of probability of risk and the education associated with human error versus the error of an AI system.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously going to be a certain level of risk when trying to use that technology, but I think it will require a lot more educational use of the technology that will hopefully get them to better understand the technology.
Right. Totally. Well, let's talk about 3D printing now, because that's something that I'm very interested in as well. Obviously, it puts, I almost want to say it gives people the sovereignty to build again. Is that a fair statement?
To a certain degree. I mean, I think you still have different components, such as the printers, the functionalities, and the capabilities of the printer that play a very vital role within the building process. But yeah, overall, I would agree with what you said.
Yeah, I think that nowadays, and for whatever reason, we can say it's political or however we want to draw it up, but obviously cost to build things here in America has gotten too expensive. Okay. And so other countries are filling the void for cheaper labor. And then, of course, with that, they are able to build up a stronger manufacturing hub, sometimes on the other side of the world, that it, even if it is on the other side of the world, it's still cheaper to have somebody else make it elsewhere and then brought here. And so 3D printing is something that's very unique in the sense that its marketable factor is that as just an average Joe, I can go into my garage, go onto the computer, and come up with some cool design for a tool that I'm trying to create or something, right? And within a couple hours, you've got, with the use of the right substrate, you've got a brand new tool. Yeah. And the freedom that provides just the average person is, I mean, really an infinite amount of freedom, to the point where even now governments are starting to look at 3D printing as a potential threat, because you can create weapons of war with a 3D printer. And that gets into dicey ethical issues, right? But it's also an argument for why the technology is so valuable, because it can create pretty much anything. And so, what specifically are you excited about when it comes to 3D printed technologies?
Yeah, just the different aspects that it can have, building different tools, or building different types of products depending on the business that you operate in. And with the click of the button from a software, the whole process from seeing it developed from a software on the computer to actually getting etched on the machine is a pretty cool concept in and of itself, and it's pretty unique. And it can also be a DIY kind of construction, if you will, for your own business as well.
Yeah,
so that whole process is pretty fascinating.
I wonder how certain industries are going to start adopting 3D printed technology, specifically in the real estate space. I think that there's definitely some areas to explore there. And as I don't want to divulge too much information, but I have been exploring that space already. But we'll see. We'll see when I want to truly make those announcements as to what's going to happen in that space. But I think that there's a huge opportunity to really revolutionize many different industries, and real estate might be one of them.
Yeah, for sure. Real estate, automotive, in terms of like maybe car design, how you want the car design, and then actually having it translated into that design. So a lot of industries, I think, can benefit from that in terms of the projected version of how it looks versus reality, and how that whole process comes into play.
That's a good point. I mean, the automotive industry, they still have guys that play with clay, don't they?
Yeah.
So the 3D printer could be used to replace those guys. And maybe, I'm sure you've seen these, obviously, like each layer is slightly imperfect. So there'll probably still be a job there to smooth out the corners and the edges and make it perfect. But yeah, I think
even building the car too.
Yeah.
A lot of autonomous robots that our client manufacturers, they play a very integral role in building the cars. Obviously, you have assembly line workers that do their own part, but I think with the emergence of this autonomous vehicle technology, that can also play a very integral part in terms of how you marry the car parts together to build an actual car as well.
Well, this may be really silly, but your three focuses are entertainment, autonomous vehicles, or really autonomous intelligence, and then 3D printing. And one thing that you just mentioned that we could play off of, it's very entertaining. It is the idea that one day AI is going to self-replicate with 3D printers into a real form.
Yeah. No, I mean, those are the three industries that I like, but I mean, we've also done projects with all sorts of companies that have diverse backgrounds as well. So those are the three that are interesting to me, like I said, just because I think eventually the type of technologies that are going to be introduced within those sectors will play
well, as a guy who's into production, you just inspired me with a movie idea. So
oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll give you a little credit at in the final cut.
Sounds good. Yeah. I'll take that.
Yeah, totally. So, all right. So let's go back to story for a second, because this is where it gets really interesting, right? Let's say I'm a brand and I've got a story to tell, whatever that story may be. And I tell that story, however I tell that story, and it fits perfectly on each individual platform, and it's perfectly engineered. And now we're at the point of ready to distribute that content. Is there a particular pacing that you have to release that content in, or can you just throw it all out there? How do you come up with the science of distribution of the story?
Yeah, I mean, so first we get an idea of what the overall branding is all about, and then we do build-ups, what we call build-ups. So kind of leading up to that kind of promoting content that's related to a specific project, and then we gradually release like a video idea, for example. We would say, hey, this, this is what the video will be about, and then kind of include like behind the scenes snippets or Instagram lives with the team that manages that project, and then we would release it. So it's kind of in gradual steps through what we call a content generation calendar, which in marketing lingo is basically a fancy way of saying we plan out the content.
How long? Like, is it a month worth, 2 months, through a whole quarter?
Yeah, so for our clients that we work with, because that might help out, we develop the entire piece of content within a week, and we submit it to the client. The reason why we do it specifically in 1 week is to make sure we're on the same page when it comes to messaging and brand alignment. And number two, if the clients that we're working with, if they offer a new service, then we can incorporate that into the content as well.
The first part let me stop you real quick. So the first part to that, you want to make sure that you guys are all on the same page, essentially.
Well, content, like brand messaging wise, right? There shouldn't be any.
That could take a while, right? Couldn't it?
Yeah, depending on the industry. For example, when we were doing the music label, it kind of took a while because we had to work with different creative people within the music label to make sure that each song and the way that song should be promoted is okay. Whereas if you go into another client that we work with that operated in the telehealth space, it's much more, they give us the content and we put our own creative twist when it comes to that content, but still aligning with the goals of the company and presenting that to leadership and saying, hey, this is what we wrote up. Are you okay with it? Does it fit your brand values? And then once we get the go ahead from them, then we publish the content. So it's industry specific. I mean, obviously the process won't be the same necessarily for different industries.
Is that difficult to wear many different hats and have to go about it in a different way each time?
It is, but I think part of it is fun for the simple fact that they're allowing us to kind of leverage the way that we want the content to be put out. Yeah. So we kind of have that ability to kind of shape the content in the way that we think it may work, but ultimately they're the decision makers at the end of the day.
Is it wise to try to get as much content created at once to then have a much longer, like pre-scheduled drop or release of that content so you don't have to think about it? Like, does that allow you to open the door to put more time into another area? And if so, what other area is that?
Yeah, I mean, we typically, like I said, we use a content generation calendar. So we pre-schedule everything. And then, say, again, if they have a new product or service that within a specific area, then we go explore that particular area. Like, for example, telehealth, they were working with a couple of drug companies. So we had to focus in and do some research on the customers that they were working with to kind of create an educational video of how it would benefit their particular brand, in addition to the already pre-scheduled content that we had developed.
Well, out of curiosity, now that we've gone from the creation of the content to now understanding a little bit more about distribution, what are you doing to collect data, and how does that help you in the creation of new content again?
Yeah, so we also provide analytics too at the end of each week, but it's not, say, as technical as Google Analytics, but we do it more on a post-by-post basis. And then we also make sure we incorporate the timestamp. That's very strategic in terms of measuring levels of engagement, the type of content that we put out. We can kind of see the hits, likes, shares, retweets, and that provides a basic foundation for us to say, hey, this kind of messaging is working. Or if it's not working, we suggest alternative marketing channels that these small to medium-sized businesses can use that we think would have a bigger impact in terms of driving sales for their companies.
Okay, so when is it smart to just scrap the current communication or the current messaging and start afresh? How do you know?
Basically, when you have no reach and you have no sort of analytical metric that you can measure, with that's attached to that particular messaging.
Well, do you have to spend a certain dollar amount in order to get a good enough gauge as to the level of performance, or is it just even organic? You're able to make that discretionary decision.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually organic, or for example, we also manage ads as well through these platforms. So for example, LinkedIn, you have to spend a minimum amount to kind of yield the results that they project, but you kind of measure the actual results versus what they project.
Right.
And so through that, we've had to make some strategic choices in the past where, either the graphic or the ad content itself had to be changed.
Are you recommending doing the minimum, or does it make more sense to actually spend more?
I mean, what I recommend is to do a minimum amount across all of the platforms, for the simple fact that you can kind of see from each platform what your ROI is or what the hit ratio is, rather than putting all the eggs in one basket, so to speak, and kind of exhausting your entire budget on one platform where it may not pan out. And then once you have those diverse results, then you can really see which platform for your business will yield better results.
That's interesting.
And typically for LinkedIn, I mean, they have a max amount, but I typically recommend staying at the minimum for the simple fact that, again, if you're a small company and you have a limited budget, you don't want to put, all $50, for example, on that one ad. Whereas if you spread it out, then you can kind of see, hey, this platform works great. Let me put a strategy around a campaign, and that may produce better results than what they may have originally thought.
So it seems like a very slow crawl initially that requires just dropping a little bit of money on each piece of content that you put out across all platforms, essentially gathering a little bit of data on everything, just to make sure that there's a nice coating, essentially like that first coat of paint, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of diversifying your budget, but trying to see the results, I guess, through those spurts of money.
How long do you do that? Because I can imagine that slow trickle of information, it could be like 6 months worth, almost a year worth of just doing that before you can truly get a good chunk of data to make an educated decision.
Yeah, I mean, typically we do it for about a week or maybe two, and define different target markets. So rather than going with what the client may want, we do kind of what they call as A/B testing to test out different target markets, different age ranges, different interest levels. And once we do about 2 or 3, maybe sometimes 3 trial campaigns, then that can help us narrow down, who's viewing what, where the highest viewership is within those demographics, and target them accordingly.
Is this this seems very, very much like a video game. I mean, I don't mean to draw the comparisons, but I see when you play a video game, there's like a certain strategy to get from point A to point B sometimes, right? And you have to overcome certain obstacles and come up with strategies and implement those strategies. And sometimes you fail. Sometimes it's game over, right? Do you view what you're doing as a game? And if not, how do you compare what you do to something else?
No, I mean, I don't compare it to a game. I think it's dependent on the audience that you're trying to attract.
Yeah.
I think if you have one central campaign that fits all your target audiences, then there's really no scope for trying to reach other target markets. So it's not a video game, but I would say that the messaging and the digital graphics are where we kind of experiment to see what will hit the best. I mean, obviously there is risk involved in terms of what those results for those graphics or those specific campaigns might be. But we use that as a foundation to kind of then narrow down and, come up with a more tailored approach to running a specific campaign.
So it's not a game in the sense that there's no winner, but it's more like turning knobs on valves, allowing more pressure or less pressure in certain areas until the system is flowing efficiently. and there's opportunity constantly happening for you based on this series of, from content creation to distribution, the different things that can be tuned in, dialed up, however you want to look at it, and then finally you've got something that's really working and really flowing.
No, I mean, I would say it's more along the lines of viewership as well as narrowing in on a specific target with different interests. So it's more along the lines of which message is resonating and going with that messaging, which then has the opportunity to go to a much wider audience.
Do you, I mean, I don't see much of a science to that. Like, right? Like, to me, I'm looking at this as like, let's say you start with story one, right? You don't really have any control whether story one is the one that takes off or if story two is really the better story to the people. You may think story one's the better story, but you don't have any control of that, right? I mean, is that fair?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, it's more, I would say it's more along the lines of graphic placement, right? So if you have two campaigns, if you can view the stats and see which one has more hits, then that can serve as a foundation of trying to attract a wider audience for your product or service that you're selling.
Well, then let me give you a conundrum here. Okay. Story one took off, but story two didn't, even though story two better fit the feeling of your brand. Do you still allow story one to take off? Or do you try to push story two?
I would say we would take both, kind of compare the metrics between the first two campaigns and see where we can kind of combine those metrics.
Maybe even adjust the audience and who's actually receiving it.
Yep.
Okay. See, to me, that's a game. Does that make sense? Like that's you're constantly tuning and dialing things, even though like one story might not be perfectly on brand. It's just taken off and you can't really, control it. But you're not going to say no. You're not going to say no to the attention because that attention's good attention. But story two better fits your brand. So you just are constantly readjusting the audience and figuring out where that could pop off and who's really going to be receptive to it. I don't know. Maybe that's okay that you don't see it that way. But I find that to be maybe a fun gamified aspect of the marketing world.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have a fine-tuned audience, then you're going to get a variety of people that are interested. But if you're trying to do a campaign for a specific company and trying to reach those people that are interested within that sector, it would seem to me, at least within the marketing space, that you would want to have people that are big organizations or big influencers within those spaces that can also drive more traffic rather than just having a group of people, from different industries that have no relation to the company that you're working with to promote their services.
Well, I have another question for you, and I don't know if there's really a right answer to this, but where do you start? Do you start at the creation of the story, or do you start at the target audience and then tailor the story to the target audience?
Yeah, I mean, we at least I can speak from the work that we've done. We typically like to get a buyer or targeted audience in terms of what they like, what they don't like, what age range, where they are in the company, and then we try to tailor the content and the graphic in a way that can attract those decision makers to view the ad.
Yeah.
So it's targeted messaging and targeted audience. If that makes sense, I guess.
Yeah, you almost have to do the end of the process and the beginning of the process at the same time in some way.
Like I'll give you an example that we did with one of our companies. For the telehealth companies, we were trying to target all of the pharmaceutical companies. So we researched out the states, the decision makers within those organizations, the headquarters of those organizations, and then in terms of age range, to kind of see what the feedback was, we targeted all age ranges. And so we also tailored the message of saying, hey, this is how it will benefit your company. We did that on a graphic, and it was kind of surprising to see who, like VPs, presidents, they all viewed that ad. And so that's what, I guess that's what I'm talking about. If you have decision makers that view the ad, then it would be more relevant as opposed to a wider net of people that may not be that in that industry or have relation to that organization. That makes sense.
And then the conversation just becomes about priorities and where that company or that personal brand places their priorities as to how they would like to communicate to whatever their target audience may be. Awesome. Well, Taj, you're the man. And I have one more question for you, okay? If you were to tell a small business owner or a solo entrepreneur, even a medium-sized business, something that they need to do today that most aren't doing in the world of marketing, what is that?
I would say always try to meet the customer needs and to build authentic relationships. Because I think, at least from what I've seen, like the big marketing agencies that happen to be our competition, it's more of a transactional approach. So really try to meet your customer where they're at too, rather than just saying, hey, this is my price, and if you want more work, you can't get it because it's not part of the package deal. So really going and trying to build those authentic relationships rather than sticking to a transactional business model, because it can not only help drive business, but it can help you in the long run formulating relationships as well.
Yeah, I see that. Essentially what you're getting at is actually care. You should actually care about the businesses that you want to go after and work with.
Absolutely.
Who would have thought? It's so simple,
Yeah, simple but hard concept, I guess, with some of these big agencies. Once they get too big, then maybe the values kind of dissipate, I guess. But yeah, I mean, actually care about the work that you do and take pride, while also on top of that, retooling yourself, right? Because within marketing, it's such a broad subject matter, and there's always new platforms that have new features. And so always try to retool and educate yourself on those platforms, kind of stay ahead within the industry.
I love that advice. I think that's great. And I hope a lot of people hear that message. But, I really appreciate your time today, Taj, and thank you. And I know that everybody watching through Michigan Realty appreciates you coming on. And you're definitely welcome back. And I think that there's more of the rabbit hole that we can get into in terms of the world of marketing and content creation and distribution and advertising and all of the little finite things that most people don't think about when trying to grow a business and even a personal brand too. So thank you for spending the time and sort of breaking down the very surface of your understanding and how you go about things. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, and hope your listeners got a little bit of marketing value too out of this podcast. So awesome. Appreciate the opportunity. You take it easy the rest of your week, and we'll be in touch soon. All right.